Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you a first impressions look at Questmaster. Questmaster is being developed by Skydevilpalm and Julian Kreutz with Apogee Entertainment acting as publisher. At first glance, it looks to be another top-down adventure game with heavy 2D Legend of Zelda inspirations. However, this game takes it a bit further by allowing you to design your own dungeons in a fairly easy-to-use dungeon editor. This immediately intrigued me because it reminded me a lot of Zelda Classic that I played with around 20-odd years ago. So a fairly old Zelda-like editor that was released back in the day, which actually, much to my surprise, still exists. Anyway, my attention was piqued, so let's take a look at the demo to decide if it should be something on your radar as well. Obviously, right away, the graphics take a lot of inspiration from old Zelda games. It's a 2D top-down perspective with a nice pixel art look. Sound and music were fine, but I don't really have much to say about any of this. It does a job to capture the feeling it's going for, and I like what I experienced with it so far. I'd love to see more creatures and other types of dungeon themes, but this is only a demo, so I expect all that will come with its full release. Currently, there's no story in the demo, but it's planned to have a full story mode in the 1.0 release with the expected release date of Q4 of this year. One thing that's really caught my attention was the apparent need to build the dungeons in the actual story mode. The fact that it has a dungeon editor, and eventually an overworld editor as their roadmap suggests, is really cool, and I'm sure many will find hours of entertainment creating all sorts of cool levels. But I find it really neat that the dungeon building aspect is something that will be incorporated straight into the story. I'm hoping it will also help with acquainting potential dungeon designers with the various tools in their arsenal. The gameplay here is pretty solid. The controls are very much what you'd expect if you played a 2D Zelda before. In Questmaster, you can dodge, attack, and have one special attack item equipped, such as bombs or a boomerang. There are other items that can augment how you interact with the world, such as the shovel to dig holes, or the feather to jump. The combat is very simple, with many of the enemies just needing a few swipes of the sword and not much else. Probably the skeletons required a bit more thought because they could jump out of harm's way, but cornering them or hitting them with a boomerang to stun was always enough. Actually, the attack items seem largely utilized for puzzles. Most of the enemies, and bosses included, just didn't really need anything else. It made the boss fights a little weird for me since I'm so programmed by the traditional Zelda formula to use the item you got in the dungeon to defeat the boss. I'd love to see more enemies where items were integral in defeating them. Although, as it stands right now, the items you get are completely dependent on the dungeon designer and don't persist between dungeons, which I didn't honestly expect anyway. In some of the larger dungeons, I found myself using a variety of special weapons. Right now you can only hold one as there is no inventory. I have no idea if this will change in the main game, but it did feel a bit limiting in how players might design a dungeon. That said, I had a lot of fun playing through some of the creations. I had wondered how adept some of the players might be with the editor since this game hadn't even hit early access yet, but I was pleasantly surprised. There were several that were well made, but my favorites out of the half a dozen that I tried were Sandswept Palace and Tumbling Tower. Both of them really showed a lot of what could be done with the editor. In Sandswept Palace, there was a lot of puzzle solving with different items, and it was fairly expansive with a really cool use of traps and enemies to make for a fun boss fight in the end. Tumbling Tower made use of a giant stone enemy where players needed to get him to smash the floor beneath him so that he would fall to the bottom floor to trigger a weighted switch. These and others had clever ideas that really made use of the editor and made me excited to see what might be done in the future with new pieces to use and maybe more functionality for the editor itself. Really ambitious creators will probably make entire games with Questmaster when it releases its overworld editor in the post-release updates. Besides the player's own ingenuity, the reason behind the enjoyable dungeon content definitely has to be accredited to the really easy-to-use editor. While I don't see myself making expansive overworlds or really intricate dungeon designs, I did think it was a really cool concept and went to work on making my own little dungeon. The editor is really nice and fairly intuitive. Many things had more options if you held down left click on them. You can give enemies different properties like blowing up, or variations if they had any, or have certain doors open up based on conditions like hitting all the switches in the right order. Decide what to put in chests, pots, design rooms with traps, moving platforms, and basically, there's a lot of stuff here, and this was just the demo. I'd love to see a tutorial for the editor though, whether that was something in the story mode or even a brief rundown of things in the editor itself. I think the switches themselves probably were the hardest thing to figure out. I had seen some interesting stuff in some of the dungeons I played, but when I tried to replicate what I saw, I couldn't figure it out. Only some of the switches seemed valid to open doors or barriers. Luckily, in a forum post, the devs mentioned adding a complete tutorial on the game mechanics in the early access release. But, despite my lack of knowledge with using the editor, I think I made a fun little dungeon. If you'd like to try it out, then search for Dewdrop Starter and let me know what you think if you do. Before I jump into my final thoughts, please consider giving this video a like if you enjoyed it, as that helps me out greatly with the YouTube algorithm gods. I had a lot of fun with this demo, putting in about 6 hours. I spent maybe about half that time just playing other people's creations, and then the rest of the time spent making my own. One really good sign is the constant stream of updates that happened since I had it installed, which obviously suggests the devs are hard at work. I could have easily spent a lot more time playing other people's dungeons and making my dungeon be the proper epic beast of a dungeon that it should have been, but I think this was more than enough time to know that I'm excited for this one. And one other thing that I didn't mention yet, but this game has multiplayer, so you could play through many of these dungeons with friends. Although, if you have no one to play with, then the game has NPCs that you could bring with you and control. I didn't try this out, but I had wondered how this might work if players needed to do something that requires precision timing, like hitting each switch at the same time. However, I'm pretty excited to see multiplayer-specific dungeons. There were definitely a few things I would pitch to the developers to consider improving or changing though. The thing that sticks out to me the most, even outside the bugs I encountered, was to make falling a bit more forgiving. There were a lot of times when I felt like I wasn't close enough to the edge, and then I'd be falling, especially when I would try to jump the gap with the feather. Some other gameplay tweaks could be making the boomerang a bit easier to determine the trajectory. There were some shots I needed to make in dungeons that required a ton of patience on my end, but I will admit that one may be a skill issue. Finally, something could be done to determine things on the Z-axis a bit better. I was sometimes confused when something was over my head, whether a flying enemy or an arrow from a trap. I didn't jot down all the bugs I encountered, which honestly wasn't much, but one that kept on rearing its ugly head was when I would go into play mode in the editor and then try to move into another room. The controls would freeze and wouldn't let me do anything despite still running normally. I had to Alt F4 to exit and reload the game. Basically, make sure to save often when creating, and hopefully it will be patched soon. Also, I have no idea how this happened, but devs, if you're watching, you might want to check out your boundaries in the Castletown map. I let my 3-year-old walk around the map, and when I looked up at the screen, I noticed that she was walking around in the water. So, somehow she broke the game. Unfortunately, I only recorded the bit with her walking around the water, and not actually when she found her way outside the boundaries of play. But anyway, this was a lot of fun. If it looks like something you're interested in, then Questmaster will hit Early Access May 29th, which may or may not have already passed by the time this video is released. And that wraps up my thoughts on Questmaster. If you happen to like this game, then maybe consider checking out my video on Skydevilpalm's other retro-esque game, being the arcade racer Victory Heat Rally. If you played the demo, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't, then let me know if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, or if you have any other questions. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.